Welcome back to the Tommy Brideson Show. I want to talk about and delve into training technique and why changes, especially changes to like your big lifts, take a bit of time to really nail and make your own. Now, when you're looking at training technique, anyone that's been training for, a decent amount of time would all have a base level of technique that's decent. Well, you would hope so anyway. And really, when then you've identified an area that you think you can improve on, you've identified changes that you want to make, and you start to execute these changes. Now, these changes may sound good in theory, and they may look good at lighter loads, but there will be a threshold that you cross, and you will, your body's pretty smart at figuring things out. So when you're uncomfortable, your body will then try and revert back to the path of least resistance. And when you're making technical changes, the path of least resistance is actually your old technique. Now, your old technique might not necessarily be bad, or the changes that you're making may not be, you might not be making them because you're at risk of injury. You're just trying to optimize something, or you're trying to improve on the way that you lift based on your body type. So changes in your training technique often take quite a bit of time to reinforce. Your current technique hasn't got there by mistake. You've done a lot of sets and reps. You've really patterned that in your brain. So your mind muscle connection, the way that you execute, is very set in stone. So in order to sort of, overcome that and then make a whole new pattern different, you're going to have to do the same amount of work to then make your new pattern your new normal. And, that takes a significant amount of time and sets and reps. And, this isn't a dire in 12 months time, your training technique isn't going to improve at all. You're going to see changes very early on. But the biggest thing to understand with it all is there's a threshold and there's a hard brick wall. It's let's put an example around this. Say for instance, I was trying to get you to change your deadlift setup. And we were trying to maximize and try to get a little bit more knee over bar so that your torso position was a little bit more upright. Say you didn't have a huge amount of reach with your arms. Now, historically, how you've been lifting is with a slightly higher hip position. Your body has developed strength through your hamstrings, through your glutes, through your back in that higher hip position. And it's not necessarily a bad position, but what we're trying to do is bring you down so you can get a little bit more leg drive. You can actually put some pressure into the floor. You can feel your quads. And then by default, your back is in a more upright position, which then say in 3 months time or 6 months time, that's going to be more conducive to lifting heavier weights. So we know the goal. We know how you're currently lifting, and we know where we're trying to get to. But say, for instance, session 1 of this new technique, I was like, let's hit 90% or 95% for a double in this new technique. The body's not going to be acclimatized to that type of stimulus yet. It's going to go like, what are we doing? I don't feel very strong here. I feel quite vulnerable. Why are you trying to make me lift like this? It's pretty smart. It's gonna override things, and it's just gonna default back to your old position, because the reality is it's a strong position and it's gotten you to the point that you're at now. So when you're making these big technical changes, you want to be smart with it, where you make the changes at the right time in your training program as well. 2 weeks out, say you're a power lifter, 2 weeks out from comp, you're not going to be making these huge changes, because the reality is the work is done for that prep. You've already ticked all the boxes. You've done what you can do at that point, and it's really just expressing your strength towards the end. So you need to be selective with the times that you change your technique. So say, for instance, you just peaked, you'd hit all these new maxes. That is a perfect time to strike. You go, okay, cool. We have a runway now of say 4 months where we're doing some off-season work. We're building, a general base of strength, potentially a little bit non-specific to whatever you were just training before. And that's where you start to make those technical changes. You use your time effectively, because the intensity, at the start of a training block is going to be down a little bit. You're not going to be lifting as much weight. And then you can also pair that up with dropping down a little bit of training volume as well. So you've got this, happy medium point where you're not really pushing too hard into volume, and you're not pushing too hard into strength. And that is just such a conducive spot to make progress in your training technique. Now, when we're looking at, I had a really interesting conversation with a guy, one of my clients that I did a technique session with this morning, specifically in deadlifts. And something through the assessment process that I identified was left ab wall, specifically the obliques, were really down-regulated in general. So there was a flared-up rib cage, there was an overextended lower back, and the ab wall, when I tested a muscle strength test, it didn't have the same amount of upregulation as the right side, right? So what I wanted to do was add some specific drills in there that would help bring the tension of that muscle up at the start of the session during the warm-up so he could get a better mind-muscle connection with it. And then hopefully when he was looking at bracing and stacking, he could incorporate that into his process and his setup of the deadlift, right? And that was a big part of what we're doing. But what I was discussing with him was your nervous system. Like when you're lifting heavy and you're lifting a lot of reps as well, potentially when you're doing volume, you're in a very sympathetic state. Like your body is pushing hard. So you're not relaxing by any means. And when you're really at the pointy end of volume and you're really at the pointy end of intensity, your body is going to go into survival mode. So you haven't got the conscious ability in most cases to go, hey, I need to think about my left ab wall whilst I'm getting absolutely pummeled by a back squat. You know, like it just doesn't make sense. So you've got to pick your time of how you execute it, but you've also got to do it when you have the bandwidth and the intensity or the volume isn't so hard that you just revert back to, you know, the old pathways or your old technique. So you really have to be selective with it. And, you know, the conversation carried on. I was like, well, where do I put these core exercises or where do I put these bracing exercises in? And I was like, well, the first thing you need to do is outside of training time, you need to practice to breathe, because breathing is a very parasympathetic state to be in. Like you're not, if you were running and, you know, you were getting chased by someone with a knife, you're not going to be like slow, relaxed breathing. You're going to be like, you know, panting, you're going to be upregulated, you're going to be pumping. So the same comes to training. So outside of training time is actually, if you need to work on your bracing, your ability to expand, practice breathing. Don't practice bracing, practice breathing. Get better at actually using your diaphragm. And then when you come into the actual training side of things, like when you're warming up in the gym, for instance, you know, at a certain point in your warm-ups, you have to switch your brain off and just go for it. Like you can't be too nuanced at that point. So say you had 10 warm-up sets, that's a lot. Say you had 10 warm-up sets. At that 7 warm-up set mark, I don't want to be doing prehab drills. I don't want to be thinking about like, you know, too much positioning work that I'm trying to change on, because I hopefully have done and enforced and patterned that in my warm-ups and during the start of the session, so that then when I get to that, you know, that 8th warm-up set, it's just execution. And, you know, you hope that over time, over, you know, say 2, 3, 4 months, the amount of sets and reps that you do warming up and the amount of, say you're doing a top set with a back off progression, your warm up sets, potentially a top set, and some of your back off sets have enough of that new quality in there and have enough of that new technique that over time the changes stick to become your new normal. So, you know, I think it's something important to note that, you know, if you just made a technical change, you probably can't expect that 2 weeks later, you're going to be able to then go and match your current 1RM with that technique. And if you do, it's probably premature. There's probably no point doing it because you haven't earned the right for that new technique yet. You need to do the sets, you need to do the reps in order to actually earn the right to lift in the new position, even if it's going to be a better position, you know, and it's going to be able to withstand more weight, it's going to be able to withstand more load. So, you know, I think when we're looking at technique changes, I think there's some small things that you can make really nuanced changes on and you get an instant impact on. But then when you're really trying to rework something from the bottom up, you have to give it enough time to simmer and build, so that then you're playing the long game, delayed gratification on your technique. You can't expect it just to happen overnight. So I think it's something to, you know, it's important because, you know, you see a lot of clickbait stuff on, you know, Instagram and, you know, YouTube, and it's like, do this one thing and your squat technique's going to be amazing. Like, yeah, granted, that might help, but you also need to make that technique your own, and you need to make it part of the process that you do in terms of your training technique. So these things don't happen overnight. Even though they do make profound impacts soon on, you need to earn the right to actually use your new technique. So that's it for me today. I'll see you guys on the next episode.